Hello everybody, this is Dr. Cole. It's Saturday afternoon, May 21st, and we're now entering week 2 of Philosophy of Life, Humanities 2333, for the first 7-week summer term, 2022. Okay everybody, we've had one extra credit quiz. We're in the middle of one discussion that will run through tonight, Saturday. We'll be having another extra credit quiz, our second of 2, on Tuesday, this coming Tuesday the 24th for 24 hours. It'll be very similar to the previous one you've had, but the material you'll be responsible for is the class notes from units 1 and 3. We may have called those lectures 1 and 3, the introductory class notes and the ones on Plato and Aristotle. Okay, so there'll be 5 multiple choice items, and you get 3 extra credit points for each one you get correct. You have 24 hours on Tuesday the 24th to take the quiz, and this time you'll have 10 minutes from when you begin the quiz. Okay, so that'll be coming up on Tuesday. Everyone, on the syllabus for this week we have Plato and Aristotle, the notes for lecture 3, and then we begin lecture 4 on rationalism and empiricism. Now let me say a bit about each one of those in turn. Don't forget, your written assignment is coming up on the 1st of the month, June 1st. That's in a little over 10 days. And if you've looked at the assignment, you're asked to discuss whether you are a Platonist or an Aristotelian. And I hope that's discussed pretty thoroughly in the description of the assignment that we got out to you. But for now, we want to take a look at an introduction to Plato and Aristotle. You have some material in your textbook, one chapter assigned. It'll give you some of the primary sources and excerpts therein. You'll be reading about Plato, among other things. You'll read about Plato in his parable of the divided line, the cave, and the sun. 3 parables that Plato tells to try to make an important point. You'll learn about Aristotle's theory of the 4 causes. So those are among the things that you should watch out for as you look at those class notes and that textbook chapter. Now, Plato and Aristotle differ on many matters. Politics, ethics come to mind. We shouldn't portray them as diametrically opposed to each other because, after all, Aristotle was Plato's student. The most important distinction to be drawn is on the matter of the relation of form to matter. Keep that in mind. Now, that'll be something very important to think about as you do your written assignment. Okay. If a distinction is drawn between the two of them, that's perhaps the major issue on which it is drawn. The relationship between form and matter. And now to oversimplify, or at least put it in a nutshell, okay, Plato believes that form is otherworldly. It's on another dimension, and things in this world are only real insofar as they take part in the forms, which appear to be on another dimension, supernatural almost. Now, Aristotle retorts by conjecturing that form is nowhere but in the thing itself. Okay? Whether it's an animal or an inanimate object, anything that partakes of form, according to Aristotle, the form is in the thing itself and nowhere else, not on another dimension. Now, as you read through the class notes, you'll notice that this was the issue that had to be addressed, and some account had to be given of the relation between form and matter, to give an account of how a thing could change and yet remain the same thing at the same time, like a person as that person ages and goes through the stages of life. How are we warranted in saying that that's the same person? That would be one example of the issue that they're trying to address by giving accounts of the relationship between form and matter. So that's a very important issue for you to try to understand as you try to grapple with Plato and Aristotle and consider whether you consider yourself to be a Platonist or an Aristotelian. Now everybody, we've also got the class notes for lecture 4 on the syllabus for this week, and we continue that into next week because it's such a lengthy set of notes and a complicated somewhat complicated body of subject matter. You'll notice you have 4 chapters from the textbook to look at that you've been assigned on the syllabus. So you want to get started looking at that this week and maybe continue it on into next week. And don't try to do it all this week necessarily. Now, in a nutshell, what is the issue between rationalists and empiricists? Well, the empiricist believes that knowledge comes from sensory experience and nowhere else, whereas the rationalist believes that it's possible to have some bona fide knowledge completely apart from sensory experience. So where does knowledge come from, and what is the nature of knowledge? How do we know? Epistemology. Okay, that's what's at issue as we look at the thinking of the rationalists and the empiricists. Now, everybody, several thinkers are mentioned in the class notes and in the text. I think it's most important for you to be familiar with René Descartes, John Locke, David Hume, and Immanuel Kant. So take those, each one of those very briefly before we go today. Descartes believed that just by means of contemplation, he could attain bona fide, genuine knowledge of himself, God, and the external world, strictly by contemplating. Okay. I think, therefore I am. Cogito ergo sum in Latin. And so he decided that he could not doubt his own existence, and from that he was able to derive the existence of God and of objects in the external world, strictly by means of contemplation. John Locke comes along and says that that's all a lot of bunk, that knowledge comes from nowhere but sensory experience. The mind is a blank slate on which experience writes. Blank slate, or in Latin, tabula rasa. That, along with cogito ergo sum, is terminology we'll see coming up from the Latin as you go through this material, both in the textbook and the class notes. All right. So Locke believes that we know based upon sensory experience. But there's a problem. You have the sensory experience, but you need the additional step of connecting that sensory experience to an object. In other words, you have the experience of seeing something, a chair or a table or a ball or a piece of food or something, okay? And you convince yourself that you're warranted in knowing that there's that object out there in the world on the basis of your sensory experience. But we know our sensory experience can be mistaken. It can lead us wrong. So David Hume comes along and says, ultimately, it's not really possible to know much of anything. He's an empiricist, but you could also say a skeptic. He believes it's difficult, if not impossible, to draw that connection between your sensory experience and that object in the external world. He thinks that Locke jumped to conclusions on that. And so we may have to reconcile ourselves to the notion that it's really not possible to know much of anything in a philosophical sense. That is to say that your knowledge or your claim that you know something is philosophically warranted. Although you'll work, practically speaking, you'll work on the assumption that you do know some things. Hume does that just like anybody else. But whether you're philosophically warranted in knowing that is another matter. So Hume comes down as a skeptic who believes you're not really warranted in knowing much of anything. He's the favorite philosopher of any number of students and professors whom I've encountered through the years, David Hume. Then Immanuel Kant comes along and tries to resolve this issue between the rationalists and the empiricists, and some people think that he did so quite successfully and brought about an advance in philosophy. What Kant says is that there's an empirical and a rational component to all knowledge. Another way of looking at that is you could say that what Kant believes is, yes, sensory experience is the occasion for all knowledge, but your mental apparatus has to be set up in such a way that you can make sense of that sensory experience. It's as though your mind is loaded with software of a sort that allows you to interpret sensory experience. And he thinks that you put the sensory experience in any number of categories, the most important of which are cause and effect and substance and accident, or substance and property. In other words, the object is there, it takes up space, shall we say, and it also has properties. Weight, thickness, color, all kinds of properties or accidents that we can think of the object or the substance as having. So cause and effect, substance and accident. Kant believes that it's our mental apparatus that allows us to interpret sensory experience in that way. And so all knowledge has to have an empirical and a rational component. All right, that's just putting in a nutshell what we're going to spend quite a bit of time going through in the assignment from the textbook and the class notes for Unit 4, or we may call it Lecture 4. And we'll be looking at that this week into next week on the syllabus. All right, so extra credit quiz on the 24th, written assignment coming up on the 1st. We'll talk to you a bit more about rationalism and empiricism and the written assignment next time, about a week from now at this time. In the meantime, good luck, take it easy, study hard. We'll talk to you again next week.